Everyone, the first transfer window of this summer is now officially closed. It will be closed for the next 6 days, as with the Club World Cup ongoing. They wanted to give the teams in the World Cup a chance to have a bit of a break from the window. It doesn't make any sense in my opinion, but I'm not going to lie, I actually think this is a good thing for Newcastle. No one can buy players over the next few days, so Newcastle has a chance now. Take a step back, reflect on everything that's happened so far, and just to make some moves, because it's been the same story all window long. This target costs too much, that target costs too much. It's the same story. And Newcastle, every single time, have targeted players only in the Premier League and we've been outpriced every single time. And it's the same thing again today. It's been quoted by Quaker, £40 million is what Burnley wants to bring in James Trafford. £40 million. Let us just take that in for a moment and let's ask the first question. Is Trafford worth £40 million? No, he's not. And of course, in Burnley's point of view, they don't want to sell him, and that's the strong message from them. They've told Newcastle now, if you want him, you will have to pay heavily overinflated prices to bring him in, which is, I mean, from what reports were stating in February, it's been a bit of a weird scenario, this one, because it stated back then that even if Burnley was promoted to the Premier League, the Mail claimed that Newcastle would sign him anyway. Craig Hope himself, a few months back, said that Newcastle is expected to complete this deal without any hitches. So now that you bring yourself to present day, Newcastle have, I mean, plenty of hitches would be one way of putting it, because we aren't anywhere near bringing them in. Burnley have now said you want to pay £40 million. That will secure the transfer. And Newcastle will never, ever pay £40 million for a goalkeeper. It is not happening whatsoever. And it's the nice and easy message to make here. Move elsewhere. We have to look for new targets. If teams are going to do this now, in Burnley's point of view, you might watch my last video about PSR. If you look at the table, Burnley's actually the worst off team in the Premier League in terms of needing to sell players. They actually need to make £20 million in profit, or they will suffer a points deduction going into next season. So Newcastle knows this information, and Burnley, in their best interest, has to sell someone. Now, of course, they don't want to sell James Trafford, but if they are forced to sell someone, Newcastle probably can negotiate this one, and I feel like it's a deal. Newcastle, if they are desperate to bring him in, if he is the one they want, and when you look at James Trafford himself, you described the Newcastle move being one he wanted to make last summer. If the two ends are able to meet, this is a sign I still feel like Newcastle can get. But at the minute, £40 million is never ever happening. Let's just make the obvious point now. But for me, before we get into the rest of the transfer news, if you enjoy the content, make sure I get down there, hit that subscribe button. 59% of you watching this video are not subscribed, so make sure you do. And I want to say for myself, I've got these brand new shirts, one here, one here. I've got 2 new shirts this season with no one on the back. I want to go to the club shop and I want to put some signs on the back of these shirts. So allow me to do this, Newcastle. Go out there, bring some players in, because so far it's just been quite negative considering how good Newcastle's been on the pitch. We just haven't reflected or show anyhow any real intent in this transfer market. It just haven't went in properly, Newcastle. And while on the topic of James Trafford, I can't believe so many people were talking about this picture yesterday. Lee Riders took a picture before the game. National team level, Darren Byrne is having a conversation with Trafford before the match. I don't know why so many people have looked into it. They could be talking about anything. There's no evidence to suggest that they're having a conversation about a Newcastle United move. It's not realistic. It's before a match with the national team. They could be talking about anything. They could talk about the game. Could be talking about what they're going to be having for tea today. They could be talking about literally anything. So we can have this conversation all we want in this video. I don't think there's anything in that, but I was surprised from you guys, the amount of people that took a lot of interest in that. I felt like there's something more to it. There's no evidence to suggest otherwise, so I can't in this video tell you that's good or bad news, because there's just nothing to it. I can't possibly give you any indication. As for our transfer reports, it has been stated from the Athletic that Newcastle United is not interested in signing Jack Grealish on loan, Dominic CALVRT as a free agent, and MADUEKE over at Chelsea. And especially when you say those 3 names out loud, I think Dominic CALVRT has always been the most linked name to Newcastle. He's been linked for years now. It's no secret that Eddie Howe does like him, but the fact now that he's a free agent this summer, almost gives Newcastle that excuse to go and get him because there's a free agent there, and he could be that Callum Wilson replacement. But the fact that Newcastle has said no to that, I think is good news, because for me, we should be aiming a lot higher than Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He's an injury-prone player, hasn't been good for a few seasons now, and he is just a younger Callum Wilson now. I actually do think he's an upgrade in Callum Wilson, but is that saying much? Callum Wilson hasn't scored an entire year in the Premier League, and he's incredibly good anyway. Surely this guy does not get a new contract at Newcastle. But Dominic Calvert-Lewin, yes, he is better than Wilson, but that doesn't say much, and Newcastle needs to be aiming higher than pair with him now. Wilson was a fantastic serve. He's had a few fantastic years at Newcastle, but he is just not that player anymore, and Newcastle need to be able to move on. And hopefully we'll do that in this summer. But the fact that we said no to Dominic Calvert-Lewin is good. As for Jack Grealish now, he's a player that comes across to me as if he has something going on in the background. I think especially away from football, doesn't seem to be doing so well at the minute. So without prodding into his personal life, seems to have something going on. So I hope he sorts it out. But personally for us, wages are high, form's off, and again, he doesn't seem to be fully focused on football. Not a sign Newcastle should make, and he's not an Eddie Howe sort of player. MADUEKE at Chelsea is perhaps the most disappointing player for fans to hear that we aren't going to go in for. I think a lot of you guys watching this video have said MADUEKE at Chelsea would be a fantastic option. Now you have to look at the obvious facts and evidence of this window. Look at the teams that have been overpriced. There's Forest, Palace, Burnley. I mean, not even the big teams around us in the league table. We're talking teams that, I mean, with the exception of Forest, teams that haven't got much of a reason why they shouldn't sell to Newcastle, but they aren't doing it because A, a Newcastle United tax, and B, they don't want to sell to Premier League teams. And if we can't get players like James Trafford in because the price has been bumped that high, imagine how much money Chelsea want MADUEKE to sign for Newcastle. Imagine how much money they're going to want from us. They'll want so much more money than we're willing to pay, and it's just not a realistic signing, as much as I don't want to say. But then again, when you look at our transfer history, Tonali, Isak, Botman, Bruno, every single one of those players, and Trippier as well to be fair, every single one of those players we signed outside of the Premier League. Our best signings we have made since the take have all been outside the Premier League. So why are Newcastle not looking at this evidence of our previous transfers and going out there to sign some players outside the Premier League? Every single target has all been Premier League this summer. Elanga, Trafford, Gay, and Bruno, Cunha, whoever it is. Newcastle's all target the Premier League. There's so many options outside the Premier League. And of course, I'm not the biggest expert of different leagues, because I don't watch the Dutch league, for example. I don't watch the Greek league or whatever league it may be. But Newcastle have scouts that do this. Newcastle have scouts that are out there. And I just don't understand, or at least I don't know why Newcastle, especially on social media, why it hasn't been reported we're going in for players outside the Premier League. We've got to be targeting players worldwide, because there's so many good options out there, cheaper options as well. And of course, you have the disadvantage where they haven't had Premier League experience. But there's a lot of players out there that will be fantastic additions at Newcastle for reasonable prices. And I feel like, in my personal opinion, we need to look outside the Premier League, because Premier League teams have got a massive inflation in prices. And with the exception of these PSR struggling clubs, no one wants to sell to Newcastle. Nobody wants to do it, and no one has any interest in doing it. And that's the biggest problem, which I can tell you now, and that's the biggest problem I'm sure all of you guys can see coming out from this video and just seeing yourselves in social media. Teams in this league do not want to sell to Newcastle, and we need to just get it on up there and to make sure we can get players outside the Premier League, because that's by far the easiest way of getting around this transfer debacle we're having this summer, because it's just been constant reports of this player's too expensive and that player's too expensive. We know they are. Go elsewhere. But yeah, that's my final message from this video. Newcastle will know this information surely. They'll do this surely, and they've got, and they'll have transfer targets on that massive list of them. Just move on to the next one. James Trafford, just let him go. £40 million is never ever going to be attainable. We could come back when Burnley are towards the end of their PSR deadline. Then Newcastle can prod them a little bit, and they'll be forced to do something about it. So that's Newcastle is probably their best idea to do, if we like, to James Trafford. But for now, drop it. We're not paying £40 million. Newcastle aren't going to pay £40 million. He's not worth it whatsoever. Let's move on to different targets. Let's get some signings in, and let's just make sure before the start of July we have some players through the door, because Eddie Howe needs a couple of additions he can at least take over to South Korea, over to Singapore, and just to make sure for this summer we have some options that are ready to go for Champions League football. Because I can't understand if fans being a bit stressed or being a bit worried about the window, because the last couple of windows haven't been good. And again, so far in this window, Newcastle hasn't been able to make a dent in anything. We're just so far away from saying anyone, and we need to ideally change it around. So I'm sure Newcastle can sort it out, but so far, been a bit of a messy window. And yet again, in this video, it's showing the massive point that Newcastle just won't buy these players because they're too expensive.